MSFvenom and Metasploit framework. We're going to play around a little bit as the adversary, right, or the red team. We're going to create a payload, disguise it as a PuTTY application, and have our victim launch it and connect back to us so we can control that asset. So fun stuff for sure. So the first thing we'll do is we'll get a command line prompt open, and we'll also launch Metasploit framework. This will take some time to get set up, right? Especially if it's the first time. Once up and running, obviously, then the very first thing we'll do is we'll get into the weeds of getting it configured and ready to take connections from our victims. So the first thing here is I've taken some notes. All of these I've tested, so they'll all work. The biggest thing that I learned through playing around with the actual template file, so grabbing PuTTY or WordPad or Calculator, using those as templates when creating payloads, is FTP a lot of times, depending on how you copy it up, seem to break the application. So I ended up using, in my case, Box to transfer the files around. So the first thing we'll do is get that handler in place. So use exploit multi-handler. And then we're going to set the payload to Windows x64 Meterpreter reverse TCP. So remember, what's going to happen here is they're going to execute a payload and automatically connect back to us. So we have to be listening. So we'll set the L host. So that's our host, our IP address. And you can see here, I put in 172.22.22.20. Now, if you look at my IP, and I left this in, even though it's incorrect, the IP address of 22.22.20 will not get bound, and it'll still listen to any IP address available. So we'll set that the L port to 777. You can do whatever you want there, right? I just picked something obvious. And then you can do show options. So you can not only see the options that you've configured, but you can also go in and see additional options that you may want to tweak as well. So that's ready to go. The only thing that we'll have to do now is run a command called exploit, and then it'll start listening. So what we'll do from here, though, is we'll go ahead and create the payload. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is we will set the payload. And the payload itself is going to be that Windows x64 Meterpreter reverse TCP. Then we'll go in and we'll set the platform itself. It happens to be Windows. Then the architecture. The architecture is x64 in this case. And then we'll put in the L host and the L port. And those will be obviously the ports we want the asset to connect to, and our IP and port. So this could be a public IP address, right? And if you have a firewall and you're having, your victims connect into you, make sure that you open up that firewall rule so they can get to your host internally. And then what we'll do is we'll use the -x, which is the template. And the template being used is putty.exe. So this is actually copied up into that folder already. The -f is to say what the format will be, and it's an exe only format. And then the O is the output. So where we want to put the actual payload. Once we create it, where do we want to put it? All right, so here we run file, and we're able to determine what file type was created. And we can see here it's x64 or x86, 64 for Windows. So I left Windows Defender on. Now, this is the original test was an earlier version. I then went ahead and upgraded to the latest patch levels and ran the test again, and it was the same result. So no difference at all. Here's the IP address of the victim, so take note of that. And now we'll hit the exploit command and hit enter. And now we're sitting waiting for victims. And you can see here we bound to 0.0.0. So this is how we're able to connect, even though the IP address was entered wrong on Metasploit framework. All right, so we executed the payload, and we can see we've got a Meterpreter shell at this point. So what does that mean? Well, that means we have access to the box. And remember, we did nothing. All we did was get the payload to the victim, and they've executed it, and now I have access. Sure, PuTTY didn't come up, but you can see I'm print working directory shows up the same. It's where it was executed on the asset, right? So what else can I do? Well, I can do all kinds of things, right? And maybe in later videos, we'll do some additional cool stuff as well. And then ultimately start looking at ways of mitigating the risk. But first and foremost, what we'll do here is we'll just create a directory, right? So let's enter make dir, the directory name, and hit enter. And here we go. Look at that folder created. So we did print working directory. We created a folder. It took us 7 minutes to create a file, to get to a victim and have access or full access to their asset. Pretty cool stuff and pretty easy.